always will be, some of them especially when there is distress of nations and perplexity, whether on the shores of Asia or in the Edgware Road. Men's curiosity searches past and future and clings to that dimension, but to apprehend the point of intersection of the timeless with time is an occupation for the saint. No occupation either, but something given and taken in a lifetime's death in love, ardor, and selflessness and self-surrender. For most of us, there is only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, the distraction fit, lost in a shaft of sunlight, the wild time unseen, or the winter lightning, or the waterfall, or music heard so deeply that it is not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts. These are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses, and the rest is prayer, observance, discipline, thought, and action. The hint half guessed, the gift half understood, is incarnation. Here the impossible union of spheres of existence is actual. Here the past and future are conquered and reconciled, where action were otherwise movement of that which is only moved, and has in it no source of movement, driven by demonic chthonic powers. And right action is freedom from past and future also. For most of us, this is the aim never here to be realized, who are only undefeated because we have gone on trying. We content at the last, if our temporal reversion nourish not too far from the yew tree, the life of significant soil.
All right, part 5 kind of breaks naturally into 2 different parts. The first part is fascinating. We'll begin in part 5 by really T.S. Eliot kind of making fun of the world of superstition, right? To communicate with Mars. Note the irony, of course, that Mars is the god of war. Converse with spirits. We think immediately of the wasteland and Madame Sestress that we talked about in our wasteland lecture. To report the behavior of the sea monster, some kind of monster that doesn't actually exist, but people are frightened by it. Describe the horoscope, horoscopicate, the telling of the future by the guts of animals like the Greeks used to do, or scry, the crystal ball and telling the future. In other words, we're always wanting to know what's going to happen, what's coming, what's coming. Observe disease and signatures, evoke biography from the wrinkles of the palm, reading palms, right? And tragedy from fingers. Release omens by sortilege or tea leaves. Riddle the inevitable with playing cards. Fiddle, I love his verbs, fiddle with pentagrams or barbituric acids, or dissect the recurrent images into pre-conscious terrors. To explore the womb or tomb or dreams. There's his one tipping of his hat to Freud, who of course had written Interpretation of Dreams in 1900. All these, in other words, everything that humans do, a lot of crazy stuff, he says, to somehow try and find some comfort, to try and figure something out, right? In other words, here he lists all the different ways that people try to find some meaning in the pain. All of these are usual, line 199, pastimes, and look what he calls them, drugs. And it's significant, I think, that he would point out as well that, of course, drugs are the escape, aren't they? And yet, we understand that those drugs, while they help us escape, they never help us escape forever, do they? We've always got to come back to this thing called our life. And features of the press. Okay, so now T.S. Eliot's going to jack on the press as well, who loves sensationalism and all of that. By the way, we should point out that Eliot, of course, was involved in the press. He worked at Faber for much of his life. And guess what? He was involved in publishing things as well. And always will be. Some of them, and these attempts, in other words, right? By the way, note the rhymed couplet here. Some of them, especially when there is distress and nations and perplexity. We don't see this rhymed couplet stuff sitting out like this very often, whether on the shores of Asia or in the Edgware Road. In other words, he says, you know what? When things are going really, really bad, That's oftentimes when people go for the superstitious types of things, as opposed to the kind of a program that he is going to be outlining here. Now, of course, St. Augustine had to answer the same question that T.S. Eliot will answer, and that is this. Wait a minute, so you're saying that, for example, looking at the guts of animals, for example, to tell the future, or playing tarot cards or whatever, all of that, reading tea leaves, all of that is silliness because that is some kind of superstition, and yet the religion that you believe in is not superstition? I mean, for example, the Annunciation and the Incarnation that you're talking about here, how is that not superstition? Well, of course, that's a legitimate question. I'll let you study your St. Augustine to try and hear how he answers that question, okay? We've given some lectures to help you with that as well, right? By the way, the shores of Asia obviously are, I mean, we're talking obviously about, in 1941, we're talking about World War II. When he talks about it on the shores of Asia, obviously he's talking about the Japanese, especially in the invasion of China. And then the Edgware Road here, well, this is an important London road that had been recently heavily bombed and shelled, okay? Men's curiosity searches past and future. We immediately think of Proust when we read a line like that. And clings, we hold on, right? The human predicament. We cling to foolishness and clings to that dimension because we're afraid, right? We're fearful. But, line 204, to apprehend, and this word, apprehend, is no throwaway word. I mean, think about it. That's really what we've been trying to do throughout our reading of 4 quartets. We're trying to figure stuff out. Apprehend. We had the experience but lost the meaning. Didn't understand the meaning. I mean, apprehend. But to apprehend the point of intersection of the timeless with time is an occupation for the saint. His first use of this word. No occupation either, but something given and taken in a lifetime's death in love. The one time this word gets used in Dry Salvages. I told you, when T.S. Eliot uses the word love, we want to pay attention to it. It's fascinating, right? Ardor and selfish and selflessness and self-surrender. Well, there they are. They're the big 4, or big 3 if you want to consider love as the same thing as ardor or passion. There it is. Self-surrender. Selflessness, right? For most of us, he says, saints are understood to be these kinds of people. We think immediately of St. Augustine, don't we? For most of us, there is only the unattended moment. We don't pay attention very well, distracted from distractions by distractions. The moment in and out of time, the distraction, right? We're back to Bert Norton's line 104 I just quoted, right? The distraction, fit, lost in a shaft of sunlight. We've seen this shaft of sunlight on the kingfisher's wing in earlier poems. The wild time unseen. We're back again to the flowers, the image, and the nature images. The winter lightning, or the waterfall, or music heard so deeply that it's not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts. In moments of epiphanies, as Joyce will reference them, and T.S. Eliot will reference them, in those moments we kind of have that moment of an enlightenment. These are only hints and guesses. I think these are some of the most important lines of Dry Salvages because it takes us right back to the very opening lines. I do not know much about gods. Hints and guesses. Hints followed by guesses. And the rest? Well, here it comes. Prayer, observance, discipline, thought and action. It's not enough just to think. You got to do. You got to act, right? The hint, we're back to the hint. Half guessed. The gift, half understood. I mean, again, we're back to the fallibilist position, right? Is incarnation. And so finally we get there. Incarnation. The idea that a God could become human and incarnate, right? We're back to the John 1 passage. That notion in the beginning was the Word. And the Word at John 1:14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The incarnation, here, the impossible union of spheres of existence is actual. Now for T.S. Eliot, this is the answer. Okay, now again, you've got to debate whether it works for you or not. The idea that when you look at those 2 boxes of Plato from our form theory lecture, you've got the physical and then you've got the metaphysical. How do you bring the 2 together? For T.S. Eliot, the answer is the incarnation. This is why Christians love this reading of this poem so much, but I think not just Christians. I think anyone with a spiritual bent loves this notion of the incarnation, right? Here, the impossible union of spheres of existence is actual. Here, the past and future are conquered. We're back to Bert Norton, line 92, about only through time as time conquered. And reconcile, the reconciliation that we've been looking for. Where action, where otherwise movement, of which that which is only moved and has in it no source of movement, driven by demonic or tonic springing out of the earth itself, powers. And right action is freedom. This has been the quest all along, the freedom, right? Not, by the way, do note how little this word freedom gets used. And right action is freedom. He's quoting directly from the Gita. From past and future also. For most of us, this is the aim. Never here to be realized. Notice how the word here keeps getting used again and again. I told you about the understanding of the use of prepositions to talk about location. Here we are. Who, what does he say about us? We're only undefeated because we've gone on trying. We're back to East Coker and the lines at line 191, right? The idea is that you got to keep trying. We, content. Contentment is, again, the goal, just like freedom. At the last, if our temporal revision nourisheth, parenthetic, not too far from the yew tree, the tree of death, we're back to Bert Norton, line 136. Remember, of course, the idea that the difference between you and a fly, as you know about fly swatters, you got to remember about that yew tree. The life of significant soil. Well, many scholars have pointed out the difference between the wasteland and here. Notice we've got, in the wasteland, there's no water, there's only rock. And this has always been a poem. And the four quartets are poems about growing things. So you got to have the significant soil. By the way, note the irony that we finish a poem that's been focusing on water with the word soil. Also, of course, think about the Christian parable of the different soils, and you have the good soil, right? So T.S. Eliot is playing all kinds of symphonic games with us as we finish this out. Of course, let's go ahead and say it at 2A. Well, obviously the quest, the freedom, the contentment, and the goal is to keep trying. Whatever happens, never give up. Isn't that what Churchill said during the time of the Second World War? Never quit, never give up, never give in, right? Keep going, keep fighting, keep fighting. The symbols at 2B, the saint as the seeker, the music which you are, both are powerful symbols. At 3A, well, I mentioned Freud's interpretation of dreams. Freud, of course, in his Civilizations and Its Discontents, actually critiques harshly the idea of religion. Marx had called religion the opiate of the masses. In other words, it's silliness, it's not of any value. T.S. Eliot is obviously trying to address this, as was his contemporary C.S. Lewis, in any number of important apologetic texts by C.S. Lewis as well, right? 3B, and finally, well, this is I think maybe the challenge for any spiritual thinker is, religious thinker is, how do you differentiate between what is spiritual and religious versus what is just simply superstition? I think it's a fair question, and I think that T.S. Eliot will answer it by saying, well, it depends on how you live that spirituality, right? Well, speaking of spirituality, we will turn now in our final poem, Little Gidding. This one is the most anthologized. Many have argued it's the most beautiful of all four, most important of all four of the poems, because it assumes, it kind of brings to a symphonic end all of the other work that's been done. I'm excited to share that one with you. I thank you for your time with me here, and we'll begin here briefly with Little Gidding. Thank you.